It is now 6 o'clock, and I hereby call the January 31st, 2023 Manhattan City Commission work session to order. We'll begin with the roll call. Jared?
Mayor Hattasol,
Here.
Commissioner Reddy,
Present.
Commissioner Butler,
Here.
Commissioner Motta,
Here.
Commissioner Morris.
Present.
We have a quorum.
Again, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Alrighty. Our first item on our work session is an update from the new Riley County Police Department Director. But first, sorry, we need to decide if we're going to allow for public comment during this work session this evening. Commissioners, what do you think?
Mayor, I move that we have public comments permitted this evening. I second.
Second, it's been moved and second to allow public comment at the work session tonight. Jared, please call the roll.
Commissioner Reddy,
Yes.
Commissioner Butler,
Yes.
Commissioner Motta,
Yes, even though it's a game night.
Commissioner Morris,
Yes.
Mayor Hattasol.
Yes,
Motion passes.
very good. Okay, Director Pete, come on up and tell us what's happening.
Good evening, Mayor, members of the commission, city manager. Hello, good evening. My name is Brian Pete. I'm the new director of Riley County Police Department. And I just wanted to come introduce myself and then just a little bit of what's going on with our department. We're currently, we have our community survey that we're going to be releasing out to folks within the community. We're looking at our year event stats for our statistics. We're going to put that out there as well. Well, not year event stats, but our current stats of where we're at right now is on our part 1, part 2 crimes, we are down on all the statistics with the exception of arson right now. So the department's doing very well. I will also, I've been going out within the community, talking to folks, community members, officers, organizations, and family members, so I can learn about what those priorities are that this department should have as we develop a strategic plan, a long-term plan, looking at about a 5-year strategic plan, a living, breathing document. And of course, that will give a guide map or a road map as to what the department, where the department plans on going. So again, you'll see me out there in the community, and I encourage folks within the community to come reach me. On Thursday, I'll be at Ogden for a town hall meeting, and we'll be doing that at each of our county locations, and to include the city of Manhattan. So other than that, thank you very much for this opportunity, and I stand ready to answer any questions you may have of me.
Commissioners, Linda?
Yeah, I won't get the chance at law board to ask you questions. So, how can you explain, or how can I better understand the dip in crime statistics, except for arson, as you said? Is there any dynamic that we should be aware of? That, I mean, I'm glad, but what did we all do?
Well, I think, so I'm at the point that I'm still looking at
Okay.
what potentially contributing
Sure.
factors may be for that. So it might be a little premature for me to answer that question, but I think that it's a testament to the community in which we live in, and the cooperation that we all have with one another.
One of the things that I saw, I think it's Topeka did in the newspaper, is that they are placing a fine, charging whatever, people who have possession of a catalytic converter. And I know that tends to be, it's so intermittent in around different places. It's hard to predict where they're going to strike and whose vehicle is going to, or a lot of times it's commercial. They are commercial vehicles that are the catalytic converters. Is that anything in your experience, you've heard of? Would that be effective?
Yes, I think it would be effective, but it also requires a certain, there are technologies out there, but it also requires a certain relationship with law enforcement and with other organizations. Again, like thinking about pawn shops, metal shops, recycling places, how well is that communication there? and knowing who's turning in those different types of things. So based on my experiences, you do have one-off instances of individuals who are trying to get money, but then you have an organized effort. And those organized efforts, when you see those statistics of 7 a night, 3 a night, and there's certain vehicles being targeted, then you know it's more of an organized
bigger.
organized effort.
Thank you. I
Yes,
just
ma'am.
wondered.
John?
Yes, I sent you an email and just wondered, do you have any chance to look into that Delta 8 situation in the city?
I apologize, sir. I did not respond to you yet on that one. I've been in meeting after meeting. I will get back to you as soon as possible on that one.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else? I guess you're off the hook early here. Thanks for coming, and we will look forward to another quarterly update probably in the late spring, early summer, and after you get a chance to get a feel for what we need to know about.
Yes, sir.
Yeah.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Appreciate you
You
being
know,
here.
one of the things we're going to be talking about is the animal shelter, and the relationship with RCPD is on our agenda. I don't know if you're able to stay, but it would certainly, we might be able to ask you questions.
Or have your people stay.
Somebody,
Oh, I'll be here for the discussion, and you know, just for a prelim to that, we stand ready to be a cooperating partner and looking for solutions. You're not going to get an automatic no as to what the possibilities are, and looking for how we can best suit and serve our community with the ACO facility. So we stand ready to be participating and cooperating.
you're welcome to delegate it.
The only way I learn is by doing.
Okay.
Okay,
So thank you.
thank you again. Okay, our next item is animal shelter and animal control services discussion with Interim Director Wyatt Thompson.
Good evening, Commissioners. As you said, I'm Wyatt Thompson, Interim Director of Parks and Recreation. Also with me presenting tonight will be Rachel Shirk, Assistant City Attorney. And then we do have some other staff and guests in the audience that I'll mention throughout the presentation, but I know this is a topic that has the interest of a lot of folks in the community, and certainly our interest in getting your feedback as to our next steps at the animal shelter. In terms of our agenda, I'll provide some introductions, background on our animal shelter and animal control operations, some of the challenges we're facing that we outlined in the memo that you received in your packet, and then have that discussion on what our next steps potentially could be. These are our facilities, the T. Russell Wright's Animal Shelter at 605 Levy Drive. We have a number of buildings there, the main building, the Cattery building on the left. We are open to the public Tuesday through Saturday from 1 to 5 p.m., and we have staff there 7 days a week to clean, take care of animals, make sure that that animal welfare aspect is taken care of. We also offer appointments for other surrenders or other emergency type situations and during those off time hours as well. This is the team at the animal shelter. Almost, I think there's 2 that weren't there that day. Because we are a 7-day-a-week operation, it's hard to get everybody there all at once, but this is the majority of our staff. We have 10 and a half full-time equivalents, plus 1 or 2 seasonals that are budgeted annually. We currently have 10 employees, 7 full-time, 2 part-time, and 1 seasonal that make up that team at the shelter. And they are a dedicated and passionate group. They're interested in serving the community. They're interested in serving the animal population that comes to our shelter, to care for those, to educate the community about responsible pet care and finding forever homes for the animals that do make their way into our shelter. And so Brandon Sokol is our interim animal services director. He's here this evening if there are detailed questions about operations or aspects of his work. He is here to answer those questions should you have them. And obviously the reason that a big reason we exist is to help you find your friend. And so these are some of the pets that we have. At least last week were up for adoption. They may have already been adopted, but I know there will be others that are available for the community. And so, you can view our list of adoptable animals at petango.com, as well as from the city's website or the city's Facebook page at T. Russell Wright's Animal Shelter. So I know that these doggos or their cat friends at the shelter would love to find a home with you if you are looking to adopt. In terms of our operations, we intake animals and we try to move them out to suitable homes as quickly as possible. We take in about 1,400 animals per year into the shelter under a variety of circumstances, whether those are owner surrenders, stray or at-large animals that are found in the community that we try to get back to their owners. We occasionally hold animals that are involved in cruelty or neglect situations while that process works itself through municipal court or district court. We also sometimes hold and quarantine animals that have bitten or are otherwise deemed dangerous while we work through that process according to our ordinances. We have a capacity in our shelter we have 151 kennels, and so we could put that many animals physically into the shelter. From a functional standpoint, there's space for 91 animals in order to provide a better quality of life and quality of care for those animals so that they have some space and they're not in conditions that aren't ideal for them. And when you look at a staffing capacity based on standards of care for a certain amount of time per day to care for animals, we have a staffing capacity to care for about 60 animals per day. So obviously keeping animals and the number of animals at any given time at the shelter at or below that 60 level is helpful. It's important for staff to not be stressed out and dealing with compassion fatigue and other issues. It's also important for the health of the animals. They're not as stressed if there aren't as many animals in the facility. And so that's the goal. Obviously we can take more, but we start to sacrifice perhaps some of that quality of care and ability to move those animals out. Obviously, the outcome of that animal is important to us. Adoption or return to owner, if it's a stray, are the number one goals. We've had about 1,000 adoptions per year on average for the last 3 years. Every pet that is adopted from the shelter has received a veterinary exam. They've been spayed or neutered. They're current on their vaccines. They receive a microchip and a city pet license. We obviously then encourage those adopters to take that new animal to their own veterinarian to get a checkup and establish that relationship for the long-term health of that animal. Some animals are transferred to other facilities, maybe another rescue or another shelter where they might have more resources or capacity for specific needs of that particular animal. That number is fairly low over the last 3 years. And some animals at the shelter are euthanized based on poor health or some behavioral issues where that animal could be a liability if it were allowed to remain in the community. However, overall, the live outcome rate, which is the number that represents the number of the shelter animals who are adopted or returned to their owner or otherwise transferred out of the shelter, has been increasing over the last 3 years from 92% in 2020 to 97% here this last year. I think 95% is a great standard, and so we have been approaching that and exceeding that number based on our statistics the last 3 years. And I think I and staff are very proud of that number and that growth over that time. A big reason for those positive health outcomes is a partnership with Kansas State University College of Veterinary Medicine, and we do have representatives from K-State Vet Med here as well tonight, and I appreciate their support. Dr. Crower, Dr. Dressler, Dr. Teach, they are leaders in that shelter med program, and they host student interns at the shelter on a weekly basis to perform all of our spays and neuters, as well as other surgeries that the animals might need. That's a program that's been in place since 2020. They do hundreds of surgeries every year, saving the city thousands of dollars over what we used to pay for contractual veterinary services. And so it's an excellent partnership. It's resulted in better health outcomes for our animals, more adoptable animals moving out of the shelter, and an assurance that those animals have been properly vetted and able to move into the community safely. So it's a wonderful partnership, and we appreciate K-State's support in that. We also have a volunteer program. In the last year, we had 87 volunteers donate 826 hours of service to the shelter. They help clean, they help with animal enrichment, they help us at various events to promote the shelter and promote the animals that we have there. On a cost basis, that's equivalent to about $10,000 in seasonal staffing costs through those volunteers. Obviously, we think that's a great start. The goal would be to certainly gain more volunteers and more hours and more benefit to the shelter and the work that we do. We sell pet licenses. Per ordinance, all animals in the city are supposed to be licensed. We have about 2,619 licenses that are current in our system. As I mentioned in the memo, it's difficult to know exactly how many companion animals are in the city. National standards would estimate that there's about 20,000 or so, and so we're in the 10 to 12% compliant range. I don't know if there's a census of pets in the city that would narrow that down, but obviously, for the percent licensure is not necessarily that significant. All of the pets that are adopted through the shelter, as I mentioned, do receive a pet license. Those adopters purchase that license from us, and so they at least leave the shelter with that license. All the pets, as of 2022, also receive microchips, which is helpful for tracking those animals if they do escape or are brought back to the shelter. It helps us rehome that animal back to its owner more quickly, and so we feel like that's a positive benefit. In case those animals do find their way back to us, we can help them find their way back home. We also sell microchips to interested individuals for their animals that are not necessarily shelter animals as another revenue source, and also as just a way to promote that technology into the community. So that's kind of the animal shelter side. We also have a side of the house that's animal control. We currently have 2 animal control officers. There's 3 positions that are budgeted, and over the last 3 years, that staff has varied between 2 and 3, depending on our ability to recruit and retain that staff. The animal control officers enforce animal-related city ordinances, and they respond to or investigate complaints or allegations of cruelty and neglect. And so those ordinances relate to dogs running at large, or nuisance complaints like barking or dog waste or dogs off leash, dog bites, dangerous dogs, the cruelty and neglect cases, and they also are involved in the inspection of private dog kennels within the city, which I believe there is one of those facilities in the city limits that they're responsible to inspect annually. We have about 1,000 to 1,400 call-outs per year. That's over the last 3 years. That's where the animal control officers go out to a site to deal with a complaint or address an issue. They're dispatched through RCPD, and so RCPD's call logs indicate a higher number than 1,000 to 1,400 range. Some of those are related to call-outs that they receive outside the city limits. Our animal control officers don't have jurisdiction outside the city, and so they only respond to the city limits, but calls may come in from the surrounding areas or the county to RCPD. And then sometimes those calls are occurring to RCPD after hours when our ACOs are not on duty, and so those don't necessarily show up in our numbers as a call out. We try to manage those through either through SpeakWiths, which is a program we implemented a few years ago, where animal control officers will try to just talk through a situation rather than responding in person. A lot of times people just need quick information or some other resources, and our ACOs are able to provide that without investing as much time as it would be otherwise. So that way they can prioritize their time to those more urgent animal or human related issues. We do work routinely and as best we can with RCPD. We co-respond with them in a number of situations. That does create some confusion about our role and their role in the jurisdiction, and Rachel will get into some of those details during her portion of the presentation. But we do have officers on duty 7 a.m. to 6 p.m. Monday through Friday, and then they're available on call after hours and weekends for those emergent type issues if things arise. A quick overview on our financials from the last actuals from the last 3 years, as well as budgets for last year and this year. For the last 3 years, there's been about a $300,000 subsidy between revenues collected through pet licenses, our intergovernmental contracts with surrounding communities, fees or donations compared to our expenses. Obviously, personnel is the predominant expense in the city budget as well as at the animal shelter. Some of the challenges, the majority of our memo and the reason for the discussion tonight is focused on challenges in all aspects of our operation, shelter, control, our contracts, as well as some other miscellaneous issues that we're experiencing and have been experiencing over the last several years. And so we bring them to your attention to let you know that these need to become, in our opinion, priority issues and addressed in some fashion in order to operate effectively and efficiently for the community. So some of those challenges relate to population management of animals, which is obviously a common thing for any animal shelter. How do you manage the intakes that you're taking in? We obviously don't control the number of animals or the type and behavior of animals that come in, but that obviously, as we have more animals, particularly in hoarding situations where a large number of animals come to the shelter all at once, creates challenges for us that can strain resources if we don't have the necessary structures in place to manage those type of situations. I remember, 6 or 8 years ago, every kennel was full at the shelter at one point. Obviously, we've moved past that, and our strategies are better than they were, but we don't want to go back to that point where we were dealing with high staff burnout, higher turnover, issues with compassion fatigue and things of that nature. So the other aspect of that is we're asked to sometimes by the public do a lot of things that we don't necessarily have authority or policy or procedures to handle. Short-term boarding requests sometimes come to us. Folks will pick up stray animals on occasion and bring them to us, and I think they think they're doing us a service by doing that, but it places them and the animal at potential risk. It also creates complications as we have agreements with outside groups or entities for the jurisdiction of where that animal was matters to us, and the public doesn't necessarily know that. And so educating the public that there are different ways to handle those animals than just to deliver them to them yourselves. We also don't always have the resources or processes in place for behavior assessment or animal training or some of those other things that would help make our animals more adoptable. We've had a high staff turnover. Since 2019, we've hired 24 staff and replaced 24 staff. Our current staff are about a year of tenure on average, ranging from about a week. Some started last week, and to about 3 years. So we have a young staff. Dealing with that turnover obviously has created a variety of challenges as staff have come and gone, and we've had to retrain, establish new policies in that process as well. The other piece that we deal with on a regular basis is our software for pet licenses is a legacy system built to tie about 25 years ago to tie into our financial software. Since about 2019 or 2020, that system has not been reliable. We need to move past that database into something that's more modern, easier to track licenses, when they expire, how we notify you when your license is expired. All of that data is getting lost in that antiquated system and needs to be updated. We have similar data management issues on animal shelter records. We've been through 3 systems in the last 4 years. One of those was an older, again, legacy system that we could no longer support from a technical standpoint. So we moved to solution number 2, which after about a year became cost prohibitive. Moved to solution number 3, which is a good system but has a high learning curve on it, which the staff, new and old, are trying to work their way through. But in the process of that, obviously, we lost some efficiencies as we had to move and migrate that data multiple times. So some of the challenges there with record keeping and just modernizing the systems within the shelter. At this point, I'll turn it over to Rachel Shirk, our Assistant City Attorney, to talk about some of the legal challenges that she sees with animal control and some of our contractual relationships.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm not as tall as Wyatt, so that aimed at me. As Wyatt mentioned, I'll cover a couple of topics here. There was hopefully enough detail in the memo for you to grasp some of the nuance here, but I thought it would be good to sort of set forth some basics just for context. So RCPD has an inherent responsibility to enforce city ordinances within the city limits, and also obviously the state statutes on behalf of Riley County within all of Riley County, including the city limits. And our ACO's enforcement of our animal ordinances is supplementary to that. So we have two different entities with different abilities and enforcement tools that are working together. Our city ACOs are not a part of a law enforcement agency, which is slightly unique. It's not unprecedented, but they are city employees. We do not have an internal city department. So anytime city ACOs and the RCPD officers are working together, it's a collaboration between two entities instead of one single response. And so there are questions of jurisdiction that come up in the field, which have given rise to questions from our ACOs and from RCPD officers in recent years about how to handle situations and the resulting frustrations when those are not, when the solution isn't always simple. I think I know how to change slides. I'm hoping I'm correct about that. Just like, okay. So as I mentioned, under state law enforcement, RCPD officers have enforcement tools that ACOs do not. And so when ACOs are assisting RCPD officers, that question of jurisdiction can arise because if, for example, we have a cruelty and neglect ordinance that ACOs can enforce, but like many of our ordinances, there's a state law parallel, animal cruelty law, that the RCPD officers can enforce under in addition to or in the alternative to our ordinance. The state statute gives the RCPD officers more power, such as the ability to seize a neglected or abused animal under certain circumstances. That power doesn't exist for the ACOs. So that is obviously a struggle in the moment when RCPD officers who feel that they are not the experts on capturing and seizing these animals hope to rely on ACOs for that service, but the ACOs don't have that inherent ability. And so this leads to just issues, again, with providing the most effective and efficient response. So the next point there, I think I've touched on the jurisdiction of the various, the different laws that are enforceable by RCPD versus the ACOs, as long as the ACOs are city employees and city officers. There's also obviously the jurisdiction question of services and response outside of the city limits. That's something that I know RCPD has hoped to have ACO support in, and we can't provide that outside the city limits because, again, city ACOs are confined to enforcement of our city ordinances, which do not apply outside the city limits in Riley County. I mentioned the seizure of animals as an example of an enforcement tool that exists under the state law, but not our ordinance. There's an exception to that for dangerous dogs when there's a warrant through municipal court. Then city ACOs do have that power, but otherwise they cannot enter on private property to seize an animal. And RCPD does have that authority, but again, the expertise and the ACOs' specialized knowledge about how to handle animals makes it feel often to, from what we hear from RCPD officers and to our ACOs, that they should ideally be able to provide that support. And under our current structure, that's not available. There are also enforcement activities unrelated entirely to the city's ordinances and also to animal concerns in general, where we've heard from RCPD that there is a desire for ACO support. The example that I recall in the last several months was a situation where RCPD officers are perhaps executing a search warrant for a crime under state law that has nothing to do with animals, but at a residence where they're executing such a warrant, they might find an animal on the premises. For the safety of that animal and for their officers executing the warrant, they would like to have ACOs be able to capture and confine that animal for the duration of the search warrant execution, and then return the animal to the property when the warrant has been executed. But we don't have that ability because, again, any ACO authority to enter upon property is not there, particularly when the city ordinance isn't invoked. So again, that unified and integrated response that RCPD and our ACOs would ideally like to offer is a struggle in the moment because there are ongoing questions of when ACOs can and cannot support RCPD. And it leads back again to what's being enforced, where, and therefore which official has the ability to participate in the enforcement activity. I also listed emergency response here. This is another limitation that we sometimes have where there maybe isn't a crime that has been committed or the animal that is involved in a situation isn't at all the subject of a crime, but perhaps there was an accident, someone's injured, there's property damage, an animal is discovered that's abandoned. In all of these situations, our ACOs don't necessarily have the power to become involved. Again, they always have to look back to whether the city code is invoked by this particular circumstances, and often it's not, which again leaves RCPD often without that specialized support, and it's not the best outcome for anyone, but it's necessitated by the jurisdictional concerns of the ACOs responding if it's not a city ordinance that is being enforced or investigated. So just to reiterate, the reason why we hope the commission that you all will consider discussing a transfer of the ACOs, if you will, to RCPD is that it would allow this fully integrated enforcement response in all these situations. The jurisdictional questions that have been so challenging for everyone and have limited the ability to provide the service that we would like to for the community would no longer exist. And I think that explains why it's better for RCPD and better for the community. I think it's also a better move for the ACOs themselves. RCPD is just better positioned to provide the ACOs with specialized training and support. They are law enforcement officers in the activity that they're providing for the city, and we're not a law enforcement agency. And so again, just the sensitive issues that are encountered in the field and all of the administrative support that RCPD can offer for that kind of activity is more difficult for the city to provide. And I just listed a couple examples there to kind of point out the sensitivity, again, of those activities and how important it is for ACOs to be properly prepared and supported to engage in those activities. To go into property and to seize an animal is a Fourth Amendment concern. I think we all understand that. And it's important that that's navigated properly. And also, anytime an ACO is assisting the RCPD, we're looking at a higher risk situation than some of the other code enforcement that occurs with city officials. It's just often I think a higher risk situation where, again, the ACO is being part and parcel to the RCPD officer's response. I think will better protect the safety of everyone, including the ACOs themselves. I think that's the last one for that topic, and obviously there will be an opportunity for you to ask any questions you might have about that after the conclusion of the presentation, which Wyatt will pick back up here in a minute. As far as our contract-based operations, I wanted to quickly cover this, although it was laid out in the memo, that we do have contractual relationships to support 6 cities and also Pottawatomie County through written contracts that describe a shelter services relationship that's pretty basic, where we'll accept certain animals and we're paid on a per animal basis. And then we also have a relationship with Riley County, which is not part of a written agreement, where we provide services, and I put some services there. It has varied a little bit over the years, but currently, essentially, we're accepting animals that were found at large within Riley County and certain other animals that are subject to Riley County's jurisdiction. We don't charge on a per animal basis, but over the past several years, Riley County has given us $60,000 annually to support the shelter. So again, we lack a written contract, but we do have that kind of existing arrangement with Riley County. There's definitely a need to reassess these relationships. However, our written contracts are just in need of an update. As we've operated under the contracts with these communities, we've just encountered circumstances that aren't contemplated, if you will, by the agreements. Also, we need to reevaluate the sufficiency of the fees that are charged under those contracts. And then there are some of the individual concerns which were mentioned in the memo that just specifically need to be addressed as the agreements with those communities are reassessed. And there's kind of the overall need, I think, to balance the demands of the contractual partners versus our need to keep resources available for the city of Manhattan's animal shelter services needs. And then at the bottom there is I need to enter into negotiations with Riley County for a written contract, which has been attempted over the years, and we haven't been able to engage Riley County successfully in kind of nailing down the details, if you will, of their expectations and allowing us to treat them the same as we're treating these other partners in terms of expecting a written agreement and having a consistent, or at least, an overall consistency in how we charge fees or reflect each community's responsibility for the shelter's support. I think that's my last one. Yeah, I'll turn it back over to Wyatt, but again, I'll be here for any questions that you have at the end. Turn the pages.
Thank you, Rachel. So there are a variety of other challenges that will need to be addressed. Multiple policies and procedures that we have in place today, but need to be reviewed and updated for consistency and the legal application of some of those policies and procedures relative to our ordinances. Review fees for adoptions or other fees that we charge, and potentially consider developing and implementing other new revenue generating programs, again, to try to help offset that tax subsidy that is supporting the shelter currently. Staff training, professional development, certification, ongoing. Our staff is professional staff. They do have certain certifications and are trained in certain things, but obviously if we want to continue to retain those folks and attract folks and develop that partnership with these surrounding entities with K-State, we need to invest in our staff in those ways so they can deliver those services more effectively to the community. And then a variety of capital improvements and deferred maintenance items at the shelter building and grounds itself, just to maintain the facility for our people, to maintain the facility for the animals. We are licensed through the Kansas Department of Ag, and they have certain expectations in terms of how the facility is maintained as well. And so we consistently pass those inspections, but there are obviously things we need to be working towards from a facility side to maintain that status. So there's three basic questions, I guess, that we would ask you all to discuss and engage with us on tonight. Should the city continue to dedicate significant additional staff and resources to address these challenges that we've talked about and provide adequate support to staff through our continued direct oversight of animal control and/or animal shelter services? So should we continue to operate both of those under their current structure and invest additional resources into them to address the needs that we've talked about? Should RCPD assume enforcement responsibilities of city ordinances relating to animals, including employment of animal control officers, possibly resulting in an increase to their budget in order for them to take on those responsibilities? I think you heard Rachel from a legal standpoint. It's perhaps better for ACOs and the community if that change were to occur, but certainly need to explore details with that. I did meet with Director of RCPD out at the shelter last week. Brandon and I gave him a tour. Very appreciative that he took the time to meet with us to get educated on some of these challenges and concerns, and I do appreciate his statement at that meeting as well as at the start of this meeting that he is open to working through and finding solutions for the issue of animal control officers and how that might work out to integrate with RCPD. So appreciate his openness to that idea. And then the final topic conversation, should the city explore potentially outsourcing its animal shelter services to a third-party group, including a potential lease of the city's animal shelter facilities? It's not uncommon for municipalities to partner with or contract with third-party private agencies, whether they be private animal shelters or humane societies or some other form who specialize in animal welfare type issues. There are a number of cities listed in the memo that have that relationship today and could potentially bring a lot of benefit in terms of the existing structures and processes and policies and resources that those agencies have in that industry. Bringing that expertise to us may be helpful in a way to elevate the services of our shelter in a way that we could not do on our own if we were starting on our own to build up from where we are. So I think it's important to think about. Obviously lots of details to work out through any of those scenarios, but we're at a kind of a starting point of which direction would the commission prefer we head, and then we can explore those options and bring back proposals or scenarios for you to consider in the future.
No, yes, yes. Anybody else? No, I'm kidding. Well, I think, yeah, obviously we've got to solve this jurisdictional thing, and I don't think anybody here would have any problem giving RCPD an extra $150,000 to take over the ACOs and make them law enforcement officers of sorts for the animals, whatever that version looks like. And obviously, a private party wouldn't be able to take over everything as far as like following the police around and stuff like that. That would still be a separate service than actually managing the shelter, most likely, right? If it privatized, it would only be the shelter, it wouldn't be ACOs too, would it? Or would it?
I think the most common model that we're aware of in Kansas is that animal control officers are part of a law enforcement agency, and the shelter service is either a municipal or privatized or potentially a hybrid. Yeah. Just on the shelter side. We're not aware of a privatized animal control operation in the state.
Good, okay. So there you go. What else, Yusha, go ahead.
Yes, I would like to hear from Director Pete to see his thoughts about this and his experience, if any, in this arena. And I mean, the mayor threw out $150,000, but I don't know what the cost would be. So I just want a little bit more information from the director as well.
It's always good to see you again. Good evening, Mayor, City Commissioners. Oh, sorry.
pick a
Good
microphone.
evening, Mr. Mayor, City Commissioners. Brian Pete with the Riley County Police Department. I look for ways, again, and it's something that was which we discussed again today, is I don't want to be right, or I don't want to be right, I want to get it right. And we look for ways to say yes. So I'm coming into this looking for ways and for opportunities to say yes. But I think it's going to be, there are potential unintended consequences. There are legal things to work through. There are a lot of logistic things to work through. There's a lot that's going to require this. So I think it's going to be substantially more than $150,000. And I know you say that out of jest, sir, but I think that I am definitely willing to work with Wyatt, to work with Brandon, to work with the team, to work with our department, to seeing what will go into this to make this happen, how much it would cost, what it potentially looks like, and then also preparing ourselves for what it's going to be like as the city looks at potential expansion, everything else. So we want to make sure that we get it right. So I definitely am ready to do that partnership.
Yeah, I think, I see something, I know it's not the same thing as co-responders when we partnered with the Pawnee Mental Health and had co-responders for individuals that were arrested with mental health or whatever it might be. So this is just a different type, but it's more staffing, more different types of training. So I think I would be in favor of putting it under RCPD, but definitely whatever increases you have also fall back on property taxes and the rest of our community. So it's just like shifting it from one area to the next. So I think it would be good to have that comprehensive picture about how many people are we talking about, what kind of training, what kind of collaboration, what does that look like, and what does it mean as far as cost in and of itself for all of those things. So I know those are details that we would like to work out, but certainly it makes sense to have it under your authority so that we know who's in charge and we know who the trained staff are. So we know that we are, one, in compliance, but we also know we have trained people on the ground doing the work.
Yes, ma'am, and I appreciate that. I think that again, there are a lot of issues and a lot of questions, even looking at legalities, because I can't help but think that this may require some changes in county ordinances, some change in city ordinances. So I need to make sure I have those tools and that access to people who can give us that information so that we can bring back a comprehensive study so everyone can make a very well-informed decision as to what should be those next steps. I apologize, I did not answer part of your question in regards to my experiences with it. In a prior municipality, I did have an ACO unit. And so that's no stranger to me as far as how those operations work and as far as how that cooperation work. So again, I think that, I'm definitely willing to work with Wyatt and coming back with a very comprehensive plan, or at least something that'll give the commission a very good idea or a better idea as to what long-term logistics, costs, training, staffing, law, everything else to that effect.
I'm inclined to think that it needs to be negotiated. I'm having trouble sitting here saying yes, to one or the other, because it has to work for RCPD, for Riley County, and they have not been, particularly a player here, and it has to work for the city. And our structure and, the laws that are just, the lines are drawn somewhat. I think I'd be willing to change some of the city ordinances if that's what what was needed, and I would hope. But I have some questions for Wyatt and Ron, but not related to RCPD. But I just think it remains to be just negotiated. I know that in the past, RCPD, hasn't wanted necessarily to do the animal control part, or they'd be doing it. So I'm assuming. and it's because it's been the city's responsibility. So there has to be some negotiation and that might, it has to work for all of us.
And yes, ma'am, and so I want to again say that I'm willing to be here as that cooperating partner to see what we can do to help. It's obvious there are a lot of challenges that we would be inheriting, and the part that nobody wants to hear is, of course, that a lot of challenges are typically overcome by money, and I don't want to open myself or to open the department up to inheriting something that we don't have, whether it's the legal or the fiscal support to maintain it or to bring it back to a previously enjoyed level. I don't mean to be insultive of any of that, but this is something that we'd all have to take a look at, bring it all together and see, is this something that RCPD can do? Because I'm also looking at what are the potentials for other administrative tasks that are going to fall on the department in regards to, just for example, payroll, HR, those different types of things that have normally been handled by the city. What's the capability and the scope of what our department can do? So this is going to require a lot of work, and we can.
I think
work
now there are only, how many? 2 ACO? 3?
3 budgeted.
2 current animal control officers and 3 budgeted. I understand what
Yeah.
you're saying. And it would require creating new policies for you too, so.
But also,
Across the
are
board.
two ACOs enough? Because when you also factor into those types of things like personnel studies, how often do ACOs, we're talking about compassion fatigue, we're talking about high turnover rate. What are we looking at as far as exit interviews? What are we looking at is maybe one of the reasons that folks it's a high turnover rate is because there are only 2 people who are working and you're on call and it's disrupting a quality of life issue. So to avoid the constant amount of money that we're putting into for training and everything else, are we paying folks the wage that keeps us competitive, especially in a market that we're currently in? Do you need more than 2 or 3 ACOs? I would, right off the bat, this is not scientific, I would tell you absolutely yes. 2 to 3 ACOs for the amount of acreage and what ACO is dealing with, it's not enough.
Go ahead, John.
Well, I'm in agreement with you, no, yes, on these 2. As far as the budget goes, to me, that budget needs to be looked at comprehensively between what the city's spending today versus what it'll spend tomorrow if RCPD is doing it and we're contracting it out. So in essence, what gets added to the RCPD budget, whether it's 150, 250, is dependent on how this whole thing works out in total, not just what the RCPD portion is of it. Also, I think as far as contracting out, I think the presentation was good. I like the memo. There's a lot of good information in there, but if we contract, we get the expertise of someone who's, done this before. We talk about us having to do policies, training, all that. We'll get those policies. We still need to look at them and make sure they're what we want, but it'll save us the time to go through there. Even fees to look at. They'll have expertise and fees that we're charged that we can get. They'll have the software that we keep talking about. We'd have to upgrade and go look for that. Overflow, if we're able to get an organization that, has other facilities, then we can get that overflow if we run out, or we can help others out if we get it. Staff advancement for the people in the department. If they want to go on in this, career field, a larger organization provides that to them, and I think, with OCs or ACs going to RCPDE, it provides that as well over on that end. And then, you think of contracting, you're thinking someone's doing it for profit. I don't know if these groups are all profit, or there's probably some nonprofits. And usually these type of people really care about animals and want to do stuff, and so getting volunteers, getting fundraising, marketing campaigns and things like that, they'll have, expertise on and how to get those licensing up. So I think this is a big win. I think the RCPD getting it puts us where most people are and takes care of all of those issues. So I see a lot of wins all the way around for this. And, I think it's something, instead of us spend a whole lot of time to make what we have work, I like to see if we can't come up with this model in, in 2 and 3.
Lynn, you're the shelter expert. What do you think?
Yeah, I spend a lot of time keeping track of that. I'm with you. I think, no on the first one and yes on the next two. And I've always thought that the animal control officer should be part of RCPD. And of course, we've got 3 budgeted, we're paying for it now in the city. So if it goes to RCPD, city pays 80% of the budget anyway for the police department. So that shouldn't be a problem. But I can't see it really expanding past what we're paying, depending upon the pay scale. In step one, if you just move it over there and we continue just operating those animal control officers in the city limits, that's different than them applying to the entire county. And that's where Riley County's got to now step up. We don't have a contract with them, but on the side, we've been taking care of all the other cities. And so that's sort of a nebulous thing, but I think that the county commission's got to step up and say, okay, what do you want to do? Like, we've got a licensing requirement, I don't think the county does, for, cats and things of that nature. And so there are a lot of policy things, and so those county commissioners need to get involved in the discussion. But I think, for sure, those animal control officers need to go there. Now, my experience has been, I think that after hours, RCPD doesn't even call on them a lot of times. Because I remember one time, a couple of years ago, a patrol officer came and captured a raccoon in somebody's house on Windsong because the animal control officers weren't there. And so the RCPD officers have been, I think, indirectly involved in some of this.
If I may, so my understanding is that ACO, they don't necessarily get involved in wildlife. It's more or less like domestic animals. So RCPD, so in that case, they would have to contact the state. But I also would think that based on some of the limitations and some of the understanding, there may be those people may not have reached out to ACO knowing what their limitations were and what they could or could not do, and vice versa. But I also, and I fully understand looking at funding and being very good stewards of the money that's coming from the tax dollars. But I did tour that facility, and I know that there is an annual inspection that's done, but from the standards and the places where I've been to, like looking at things like ventilation systems within the dog kennels, and all the repairs that need to go on that facility, I have logistical concerns. I can't back this up right now is because I haven't seen any of the direct inspections or anything else like that, but I have legitimate concerns with logistics, and my concern would be if we just got inherited something, but we did not get the logistical support to take that to where it needs to be. I'll go on record by saying again, and this is partially informed, but I think that the current facility that you have is dated and needs to be
Yeah, it may be, but RCPD won't be running the facility. They'll just be handling the animal control officers. So, the facility, the idea there is to get one of these nonprofits, and I agree, update it, make it better. And I also think, on the contracting, because we've got all these agreements with the other cities, our licensing, requirement, we're hitting about 10%, which is average for most cities when you include cats. But there's a number of companies that'll do that for us. And, I've recommended that for the past 5 years, but it's never gone anywhere. And DocuPet is the one that I like the best out of looking at all of them. And they'll take it over and run it. And they claim they can increase the number of licenses that cities get. That's been their track record. And of course, when you look at, we've got only 10% licensed, there's a lot of animals out there that aren't licensed. And of course, our animal control officers don't go around enforcing that either. We're not hanging out in the dog park checking licenses when people bring their dogs in. But these companies have got ways to encourage people to license it so that it's not viewed as a chore, as a benefit. So I think that's got to be an integral part of it. I think 2 contracts, one for the licensing part, that'll save a lot of effort and customer service. One for the shelter itself, hopefully with a nonprofit, and then take a look at how to integrate the animal control officers, starting off with at least 3, and it may require more, especially if Riley County wants to have them get involved in the entire county and not just the city. But I really think that's the direction we need to go.
So what I would like to know is, I know that Fort Riley has, I don't know if they have a contract or something with Junction City, But I want to know how other communities are doing it. If they do have a nonprofit working on this, or if they have, how we've reviewed pet licenses many times. So to me, that, we can go on and off on that, but as far as what does the private industry look like in this arena, and what does that cost? We're assuming it's going to cost less, but I'm not sure of that. I don't know what that looks like. So I would like more information on how other communities are doing it, if it is not under the city, if it is privatized, or if it is under a nonprofit at some agency, and the benefit to the community.
And I will definitely cede, but I will say again that as I'm more than ready and willing to find ways to do that negotiation, but I think that I want to emphasize this, I don't want to underestimate what's going to happen, because when you do like work on a house, you peel back a few walls and you find out there's some fire damage or some water damage or everything else like that. I want to make sure that we get it right and that we're willing to put in the same amount of work and logistics and financing into it to make sure that we don't find ourselves back in this area. So I definitely am willing to have those conversations and do those things. I will need those resources. I will need time to come up with those answers, but I don't want to, again, I urge the commission to, it may not be as cheap upfront as we all hope it to be.
This is step one, just kind of willingness to come to the table, and then let's figure out how we make it work.
And the other thing, you mentioned wildlife, and of course, I get a lot of calls about wildlife, and I know our animal control officers stay away from that, but like a deer gets hit and is injured on Anderson. I saw a police officer, I guess last year, had to shot one of them out there. But the police can do that. You can't, as a citizen in the city, discharge a weapon to kill an injured deer. And so that's something that needs to be part of this, that would drive up the cost, because a lot of people are concerned about those things. We've got a lot of animals running around the city wild, from coyotes to deer to, bobcats and whatever, and that's a concern, and we do get calls on that, and I think we've been just sort of ignoring it. It's like, well, it's not our problem, but then the citizens don't have a way to deal with it either. So that would be an added cost, and we need to figure that too.
And yeah, and I'm definitely willing to, there are a lot of nuances that are going to accompany this, and there's going to be a lot of legal requirements. I can't necessarily lean on the city because the city has the legal expertise that the city has, and I have to also look at the contracting of how much is it going to cost me to look at other attorneys. So I am looking for in-house ways, but there are a lot of different things, a lot of different questions I myself are going to have based on my previous experiences with it. And with that, sir, I will.
All right, thank you. So, yeah, to questions of wildlife, and then I'll come back to the topic of how other cities operate. I think there was a time where animal control officers did respond to wildlife concerns, and I think as we investigated, what authority do we have to be doing that, and then what are the costs associated with with those responses, as we started to pull back from those activities. And it's a reliance on another agency or another private pest control company to go get the bats out of your attic or the possum out from under your crawl space or whatever it is. We didn't have the jurisdiction or the resources to go into people's homes or do those things, or even dedicate the staff time over time to the wildlife on the side of the road. So that's not something we currently do. It is something we used to do, and I know folks have brought up to us, well, it used to be this way. Well, that is true. We've made some changes based on necessity to do that. In terms of what other communities are doing, we did evaluate some other communities in terms of their municipal structure, in terms of partnerships, how they operate with ACOs, how they operate with shelters, do they partner or have contracts. We listed a number of communities in the memo that do have contractual relationships with humane societies or private shelter operators who may use city facilities as a lease type agreement, or may use fully private facilities that they've fundraised for and constructed on their own. So there's a variety of models out there. I think Wichita has a hybrid model where their humane society is on the same campus as their city animal shelter, and so they have a share relationship of some sort where a city does some parts and which the Humane Society does other parts. And so there's a variety of options, I think. And so at this point, I don't know exactly how each community, what type of agreements they have or how they handle pet licensing. And those are things we can explore, as I'm hearing consensus to explore that type of a route where we seek out some assistance.
Yeah, I think it's good to have all of that information, mainly if we're looking at reducing the cost from, $600 some odd thousand. And ultimately, I'm thinking that's what we're looking at, to see if we can be more efficient with our funds and get better outcomes. But if other communities are spending just as much to get those, whatever it is they're doing, then we need to consider options, especially with staffing. I think if you say high turnover, maybe it is better to go with a private agency. If we contract it, I don't know how much that would cost us. But the best interest of the community needs to be the highest priority. If they're doing what the community needs for them to do, whether it's cats, dogs, wildlife, whatever it is, I think that's what we need to analyze, and if it's the most efficient and best way for the community.
Yeah, I think the public demands that we have animal control officers and a shelter, and they want to be able to have that as an option for them when that need might arise. And so it's just a matter of, figuring out getting rid of the logistical, that's not the right word, but the not being able to do stuff because you're outside the city limits, not being able to do stuff in the city limits because they don't have the laws and the ordinances to do that. There's a lot of stuff that needs to be cleaned up, and I think we're all willing to make that happen. So why don't we go ahead and open up for public comment, brief comments. Come forward, state your name, where your address is, or if you have some specialty that we need to know about, let us know what that is too. Thank you.
Yes, Gabe Knight. Mayor and Commissioners, my name is Vanessa Cowie. I'm the Executive Director of a nonprofit that you were talking about that would be interested in this type of a partnership. So we contract right now with 6 different municipalities. We have our own single facility, but we're looking to grow. We're looking to scale. So we're looking for cities like yours that are on an interstate, that have a population of this size, that handle this volume of animals, because that's what our expertise is. So we believe that with scale, we can decrease your costs and we can improve your outcomes. So I'm here to answer any questions if you have any, but I just wanted to let you know that there are organizations that would be interested in responding to this type of partnership.
What is the name of your company?
Our organization is called Prairie Paws Animal Shelter. It's
Prairie
located
Paws.
in Ottawa, Kansas.
Okay.
Just curious, you've heard the conversation here, and we've got half dozen cities, we've got 2 counties, we need to get everyone in agreement. Have you come across any of that before? How much difficulty you think that would cause for you in trying to get something set up? Obviously, we'd be involved in trying to move that along. but-
Absolutely, and I think Commissioner Morse had a good comment. It's all about negotiation. Our attorney is exceptional at this. She has negotiated every city that was listed in that packet for you: Lawrence, Topeka, Wichita, Kansas City, Missouri, and she's found efficient ways to form those partnerships that make sense. So right now, we contract with the City of Ottawa, the Franklin County, and every municipality in there, and those are all separate agreements. And they're all just workable for that relationship. And sometimes it's a per pet model for very small cities. That's manageable to them. For big communities, you would rather do a per capita flat rate amount. So, for the City of Ottawa, it's based on how many people live there. It's multiplied by a dollar amount, and that's the flat fee that we get. But then when you're talking about price, you're talking about scope of services, and you're talking about transfer of assets. So whether or not that facility comes in that agreement or it doesn't, or the equipment that's in it, or the surgical equipment, all of that moves that fee. So I think negotiating is going to be important in that, but knowing what you're looking for is a good start. So this has been great discussion tonight. I really think other cities could copy this exact presentation, actually.
So none of the stuff we talked about was an insurmountable problem as far as you're concerned.
No, and this is really very common for a municipal function to face these challenges. I've operated a municipal entity, and I've operated now a private entity of very similar sizes. A private nonprofit has a huge advantage to overcome these resolutions, you just don't have the opportunities that we have. So it's not about bad leadership. It's not even about bad ordinances. It's that financial structure of being a public entity brings with it significant challenges. Combine that with the size of your organization is an awkward size. 1,400 intakes is too big to be run by volunteers, not big enough to justify specialized positions and specialized departments. So if we merge together to create a bigger volume, you double the size of my organization overnight. That allows me to justify departmentalizing my organization. So there's benefits both sides, and I think you pointed that out. It's got to be a winner for everyone, and it would definitely be for us. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Hey.
Glad you were here. Anybody else? All right, well, thank you for your public comment, people. And is there any other questions for,
I just have, we jumped right into the big picture, but I had some questions about, so it looks like the budget is costing us $500,000 that we can't recover. If the amounts here are, the revenue is $282,500 for 2023, and the expenses are $788,000, so that's about $500,000. It does talk about, you have a trust fund for large capital projects. How much money is in there? I don't think I recall ever hearing about that before.
I'm looking at Rena to see if you know that number off the top of your head. That the Animal Shelter Trust is a fund where we receive donations or grants larger than $1,000, and it is earmarked for typically capital investment in the facility.
Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. The current balance is about $169,000.
Okay, thank you, that's helpful. And there are some capital needs out there, so.
There are. We have a couple of projects in the works that's using some of those trust resources to re-roof the main building, which is it's 30+ years old, as well as deal with some other exterior building repairs. We just ran some new fiber infrastructure to the CAP building to repair some damage that had occurred there. So there's a variety of things that we're trying to undertake here now, and I've tasked Brandon with a facility and our building services team to do an assessment of the facility, knowing the KDA standards in mind, things that they've not cited us for, but pointed out to us at past evaluations, the kennel floors, kennel gates and latches, some of the doors. These are things that need to be addressed over time, and so we're working on a strategy to address those things over a period of years, because obviously $169,000 is not enough to tackle that all at once, but it is something that we can develop a plan for.
What is the cost to microchip an animal? Is that, it's worthy, and I support it, but I just wondered if is it minimal?
I believe it's $10
$10, okay.
for the public to come have a microchip inserted.
No, I meant for the animals that you have in the shelter, not the public.
Our cost is $6.65.
Okay.
It's a partnership with our licensing, with our animal management software, and so the software is free if we use their licensing, if we use their microchips, which we purchase. So it's an offsetting cost, but then we also sell those microchips at retail to the customer as well.
I wondered, got some more questions here. Is there a state association or training center for animal shelter administrators or leaders and animal control officers? Does every municipality have to train their own, or is there some place that could do training?
I know for certain there are organizations and associations within Kansas that train animal control officers, and we have engaged with at least one of those organizations over the last 3 years to train our ACOs, and they are certified in a variety of skills and knowledge that's related to animal handling and, the use of equipment used to restrain and capture animals and a variety of topics. I would assume that there is a similar organization for animal shelter administrators, but I'm going to look to Brandon or my K-State partners to give me a thumbs up as to yes or no that exists. So I don't know that we have engaged with those groups in the past, but that's the type of training, certification, professional development that I spoke of on that slide that we should invest in our employees in that way so that they can deliver the service if we were continuing with our current.
And if we want a quality
Model.
program,
Yes.
it seems to me that we have to adhere to some standards for the.
And those are questions that as we explore a potential private partner to assist us, those are questions that we can ask them, do you have certifications and training? What kind of training do you provide your staff? So that we know if we do enter a partnership agreement of some sort, we know that the staff that will be working at our shelter will be and delivering that service.
Is there any model at all for having animal control in like the code area of the city? They both have standards, they require inspection. I mean, is that not, just not done anywhere?
I think we would have the same jurisdictional issues that Rachel described in terms of we would still rely on RCPD for certain things. It would just, they'd be working with code instead of Parks and Rec and animal shelter. So no, I wouldn't envision that being feasible.
Has the rate gone up that we charge Riley County at all, or is it just sat at 60,000 for 5 years?
I believe it's been 60,000 for the last 3 years.
3 years?
I think they raised it about 3 years ago. I think it was 45, and then for a long time it was 45, and it's gradually gone up. What I've emphasized to the county when I've met with them about this, and most recently is last week, is that, we appreciate their support. Every little bit helps.
Absolutely.
Basically that service is to allow any citizen in Riley County to bring a animal, a dog or a cat, into our shelter. Again, there's no contractual agreement. There have been times in our history where we have patrolled in the county or responded to situations in the county. We have a longer history with Riley County. There was a fairly long number of years where our joint city-county health department had jurisdiction over the shelter, and the ACOs were at the police department. So there has been circumstances where that happened. When that
History.
went to a health department, county health department, that's kind of when we restructured. So, basically what I've indicated to the county commission is that you're asking us, we really need, if we're going to operate in the county, we need your authority to operate. And so in empowering us through a contract and an agreement is something that's necessary in order us to meet those expectations. And that really varies with the little cities too. I mean, one of the comments by a former mayor of Riley, who's now a city commissioner or county commissioner, is that, I think their perception of what they were going to get for animal shelter services is different than what the contract says. And again, it was mainly for them to able to bring an animal here, not for us to respond there. But those work out based on what those needs are and are negotiated for those particular aspects. So we provide that sheltering service for a large area so they don't have to support that service.
I noticed Randolph is not one of the participating cities. And I wonder, as we look to the east, if the issues that will arise over there too. I mean, sure, we can stay in the city part, but there's, I'm sure
Yeah, I'm not sure. I think Wamego's probably one of the more recent ones, and they used to have their own shelter, and then they couldn't support it. So they asked us to bring there. That Potawatomi County has employed a private individual that could capture and bring the animal to the shelter. So it varies significantly, and sometimes it's hard to keep it all straight, especially when you're trying to explain that to the citizen.
when So with thinking that any Riley County resident could bring an animal to the shelter, does that mean that resident would have to pay to have the shelter take the animal?
No, that
No,
was the reason
That-
for the subsidy.
All right, okay. Thank you. Let's see. Just lots of questions, you know, just as I was thinking through this and preparing to come. But I just think it has to be negotiated. Riley County, the police, who knows, health department, I don't know. But certainly the city, if we have this facility, we're, you know, a key piece of it, if we're gonna continue to maintain that facility and have to worry about improvements in the future. So I support the, you as administration. I'm disappointed that with some of the, maybe the condition of the facility, the short tenure of employees. I think, you know, it's the lack of software to actually do the registering. So we have up to go. We only have up to go, so that's good.
Correct. We've identified a number of issues. Now we're in a mode of trying to solve them the best way we can, and appreciate the feedback, discussion, and questions that you've had so far.
And I wanted to mention one other thing. There's a group just trying to get started here in town called Community Cats, and I talked about this about a year or so ago. And they're pushing, it's some K-State vet students primarily, and they want to push a TNR program. That's trap, neuter, release. And because we've got a lot of feral cats in certain parts of the city, and if we target those, and of course the shelter didn't want to take that on. But if we could get, you know, a partnership and get those guys integrated in it, because they're highly motivated, they don't have a lot of money, they're trying to collect some donations. But I think that's a good thing, because that'll keep a lot of those animals out of there, and it'll stop the population from multiplying like it is. And so we've got to relook that. And the other comment I want to make, when you're talking about wildlife, you know, I agree, we shouldn't be sending animal control officers to get possums out from under people's house because they don't like it or worry about the bats. My concern was that, you know, years ago, we had a rabid raccoon, you know, on Windsong, and I called, that's probably 3 years ago, and the animal control officer came and took care of it. That's the kind of stuff people are concerned about. You know, if you got some critter out there that's gonna be a hazard to their kids and stuff like that, and we've got to be able to respond to those, but you're right, to put some parameters there. It's not our job to get bats out of your attic. That would not be the case. We're talking about, you know, animals, wild animals in public areas that are gonna cause a nuisance, that may be sick, injured, rabid, that kind of stuff. So if we'd approach it from that direction, I think that narrows the focus a little bit, because I agree, it can't be wide open. If there's a dead skunk under your house, you're gonna have to take care of that.
Maybe lastly, I just want to thank the animal shelter folks for coming tonight and really appreciate the work you guys do.
I just have one question. We have a transient population between Fort Riley and our college students. Has that had a dramatic impact on our animal shelter, or would we still be in the same situation regardless?
I mean, I think the transient nature and the seasonality of population shifts in and out of the community does affect the shelter. I think and I haven't tracked this for sure to show the graphs aligned, but I would anticipate that as some folks move or as folks deploy, our animal intake may go up because people are bringing those animals to the shelter. And as new people arrive in the community and get settled, they want to expand their home here. They come to the shelter for a pet. So I think it's probably related, but
Yeah, it would just be good to know. I think there's a lot of students now that bring pets in with them. They may take them home, they may not. I'm not sure. I'm just making assumptions because we are such a transient population. So it might be good, it might be bad, I'm not sure. It'd be good to know that data if we're going to pass it on to someone else, whether it's nonprofit or a for-profit company.
Yeah, I would just add, I mean, I think we have a lot of experience with the seasonal nature of it, whether it's graduation and going on, a student going on to a new job and doesn't have that ability to take that animal with them or other resources to them. And certainly, I think the same is true. COVID kind of changed things, and people wanted a pet to be with them at home. So we saw a lot more adoptions during COVID. So will we get back to some of those traditions? Maybe, maybe not, but we certainly have had circumstances where we've seen those censuses rise with some of those large events that have happened.
And also, I want to give a shout out, like John did, to folks at the shelter, especially those of you that are doing the social media posts. Because I think those things have really made a difference in the adoption rates, because you get those pictures, and I try to cross-share those as much as possible. And I think that has actually been great. Things like the, Howl in the Park, thing on Halloween and things of that nature have, I hope, driven that up, because you get those pictures out there and somebody's gonna come get those little guys.
All right, very good. We'll call that, put that one to bed and move on to the next one, which is, thank you for your time. Review approach for reviewing and adjusting various fees charged in the city for services. Jason?
Good evening, Commissioners. We're really looking for feedback here to continue this process throughout the calendar year of '23. We have a number of fees that we have throughout the system. They're in various ordinances and resolutions. It's difficult for us to ensure a consistent review. We have over 800 fees throughout all our departments. It's tough for our public to identify where those fees are, and we do have some that have just been untouched for decades. Roughly, these three areas are what we plan to bring back in front of you. This combination is closer to 500 of the 800. There are other fees and rates that are identified, but we probably are more consistent in our review there and bringing those back to you all. We'd really like to consolidate this into a format that can be easily searched and realized by not only staff and the commission, but the community as well, the public looking for those things. We feel like it'll be a more efficient way to review and update those fees. Our goal is to work through the spring with several departments, making presentations to you all in terms of the history and some recommendations, and then look to build that into the budget for 2024. By fall of this year, then we would have ordinances, resolutions, whichever we decide to go with, prepared for you all to take action. Tonight is really just an opportunity to give you a calendar of events and topics that will be discussed. We'll do our best to prepare this information. We also recognize and realize if we're not able to get to everything this year, we'll incorporate it into next year. We're not going to ask our departments to stop everything and do this. We're going to do as much as we can. And Kristen in our office is facilitating a lot of this. But you can see here by the fall, we've worked through a process with you all to talk about these fees, talk about adjustments, make those as part of the budget process, and then ultimately look at resolutions in the fall. One item, I think that might be it. Yeah, one item I just want to highlight for you all. We have to be reasonable with our fees. We can't run off and just charge 10 times on a rate. It's no different than a lot of other governmental entities. You simply can't take advantage, even if the demand is high. You have to be reasonable with your fees. So when we bring some of these things up, the adjustments may not be massive. They may be small in nature, but we'll have to talk about why we're making those adjustments. So I just wanted to plant that seed before we actually get into those topics. But ultimately, want to see if you're supportive still of working through this consolidated fee approach, and if 2024, building that into that budget is appropriate and consistent with your thoughts. That's all I had this evening. Happy to answer any questions if you have any.
Jason, I'd like to ask you to give a priority to some of the oldest fees. It's been the longest time since they've been adjusted, so you'd never have to come again and say, it's been years and years, and this policy and these fees have never been looked at. I mean, we need to, because I thought we cleaned things up like twice since in the 8 years I've been here. And, but to hear that there are still some really old ones that haven't been addressed, I'd like for you to give those priority. And I hope they fit within the criteria you've set out here. It seems like the right thing to do anyway.
Yep, they do, and that conversation is repeating itself amongst our departments. They concur with you.
You have to find them.
Oh, we'll find them.
Okay.
Consolidation's really, I think, the overarching scheme here. How much we adjust a fee is clearly, we need to be reasonable, but consolidation so people can find them
Because you just went
consistently.
through Parks and Rec and, the rental rates and all kinds of things. You really did update within the last year.
Park and Rec has over 300
Yeah.
fees, so
But you're not after those so much as
right,
all of the others.
I think actually Wyatt's gonna bring in some stuff
Okay.
before we even get to the broader Park and Rec that he'd like to adjust for this summer. So those will be coming later in February too.
Yeah, the problem is the balancing act of, I'm already paying taxes, why do I have to pay extra? With, I never use that service, why should I pay for that? And so that's the thing, is that what's important to one person, their neighbor, don't care. And so that's why, that's one of the keys with keeping it fair. Everybody's got to pay something as the taxpayer, but we sure would like the users, end users who are taking advantage of the thing, to do a little bit more, obviously, than what the average person has to, is not taking advantage of it. But, yeah, we're all about reasonableness here, I think. Win?
Yeah, I agree with that, the taxpayer's got to provide the base, but then we need user fees for the people that particularly want to use a particular service. And then I brought this up before, and I know a lot of people don't like it, but we have a lot of folks that use our facilities that are not part of the tax base, as Mark pointed out. They live outside the city limits because they don't want to pay city taxes, yet they use our facilities. And we've never really explored the idea of having a, fee for city residents and a fee for non-city residents. And I'm not so sure that isn't a valid thing that we should look at.
I think we could incorporate that in the discussion. And I think we've highlighted for you all where property taxes go. And you get through RCPD and you get about 3/4 of the way through fire, and you're pretty much done with property taxes for the city. We rely so heavily on sales tax. And this region, with the pull factor that we have, generates a tremendous amount of revenue for us well beyond our city limits. I think the conversation, could really be more about that in terms of where do revenues come from that actually support our programs and our departments. Because again, once you get beyond PD and fire, you would clearly place those at a high priority. And that's really where you need your stable revenue streams to come into. Sales tax is going to fund the rest of the general fund and our ops. So a resident, non-resident, region, non-region type of discussion, we could clearly get into that topic.
And it's a valid point, and that would counter the argument of people saying, well, I'm paying property tax to use the Douglas Center.
Yeah.
And the people in Pot County aren't, but if you frame it that way, then you can say, hey, it's not relevant.
Yeah, and our 17 mills at the city and the 52 overall, with 35 coming from outside RCPD and the library, our 17 breaks down pretty nicely with fire, debt, and our employee benefit funds. We just rarely get a whole lot of property taxes into the other departments. So, but those statistics, that data, that conversation, we could easily incorporate that and have facts and figures for you all to react to.
What do you mean by consolidated? Give me an
One
example.
place. Right now, they're in multiple resolutions
Like
and
on a
ordinances.
website, it would be in one place?
No. One resolution that's
One
very
resolution.
long
Okay.
that lists all these fees, so you keep track of a consolidated fee approach.
So we're not going to be necessarily discussing maybe even how much those fees are. but also in one place, and discussing how much those fees. are.
Correct, both.
Not combining fees,
Not combining fees. Okay.
combining where they're
Put them in
vote
a,
on them and stuff.
Yep.
put 'em in a location that it's in front of us
Right.
all the time.
It's a better resource
Budget
for everybody.
process.
No,
So
I
it's
think- yeah.
versus something that, you know, is stuck in an old ordinance and just isn't something you see all the time. So if we have a fee resolution as part of our budget process, it's there and we
Yeah.
can examine them. Should
Okay.
this have an inflationary adjustment? Is it related to people and the cost of doing business or not? Maybe, you know, some of them aren't related to people necessarily.
Right. Yeah, I think one of the things mentioned as resident and non-resident, there are a lot of people that don't live here that may have a business here or may work here also. So I think all of those things are something we need to look at. And if somebody's using our facilities, chances are they're also going to eat here or stay the night here or visit something else here that's in Manhattan. So that would be something that I'm sure we would look into deeper if we're looking at something that Commissioner Butler had suggested. You know, even with the garages, with downtown and parking hours, there was this almost hysteria on Facebook about, oh, you know, you're raising this and you're raising that. I can only stay there this many hours, even though we've been talking about it for 2 or 3 years. And even though if you're going to be in the garage after 2 hours, 1 more hour, that's $2 extra or something like that. So I think that's how sensitive the community is when it comes to fee structures and fees of whatever they might be. We experienced that even with pools, and that's why we kept having to reduce those pool fees and even have a twilight hour of sorts where they pay $1 to come in. So if all of that is in a consolidated format of some kind, it also gives the community a chance to understand the fee structures that we have in the community and what they're willing to put out, and give us feedback if they feel it's appropriate or not. And we can use that information as we make budgetary decisions. So I think it's important that we keep them informed in this process as well.
I'd say I'm good with your schedule, good with the approach, and just want to go forward. And I think, yeah, it is important to say why you're raising the fee, because that's the question we're going to get.
Yep. Thank you.
All right, very good. That wraps up the work session items. On to the city manager briefing.
Just a few things to visit with you before we kind of get into the planning chart. I just wanted to update that we'd like to move up the schedule for your appearances on Cayman. I've got Wynn covering February, and I think we're good to go there. And then Commissioner Mata has a teaching conflict again this semester, and so Linda, we'd like you to advance to March, and then Mark would be back in April. And then depending on where we are with Commissioner Reddy and that vacancy, we may need to change that again. So, but that's got at least the next 3 months covered, so.
But by May, Yusha would be available probably.
That's true.
Into the legislature, yeah.
All right. A couple things that I've had in your mail folders, and I just wanted some feedback, and some of it could be related to the planning chart, but I had provided a copy of the Flint Hills Regional Council dues to you to look at. They're the same as they've been in the past. I was planning on executing that because it's within my authority, but if that's something you'd rather see me bring to a commission meeting, I'm happy to schedule that as well. So if you can give me some feedback on that.
That gets paid out of that industrial fund?
We do take it out of the Industrial Promotion Fund, which is basically.
Where does that money come from?
So it's essentially land sales in the business park is the primary source.
Okay, and I think that's important to highlight, because some people get upset about that, you know, again, worry about, you know, their tax money going to that, and when you look at, you know, the return on that, I think there's a greater return, the way people see it, to the region, not so much to Manhattan, but we're paying half of the dues. I mean, they got about 116,000 in dues, I think, is what that showed, and we're paying about 48,000 of it.
Yeah, it's on a per capita basis for the region.
Yeah,
and-
so Manhattan's financing the regional council, and we're not getting 50% of the return on what they do.
Well, wait. How about that airport funding, though?
Yeah,
Well,
that was,
That buys them another year's two worth of,
Or
Yeah, and you
two
did
or
mention
three.
that last time,
So I- if
but
you
I
haven't-
think it's important to highlight the point on that industrial fund and where the money's coming from. Because that softens the blow on that a little bit.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and if you haven't read the report that the executive director sent, Jerry, that they have been leveraging. I think one of the more significant things they did is they formed an economic development district, so they have a front door access to the Denver regional office and the Economic Development Administration, and that's something, so if we were to apply as a city, we'd be in second place behind them. All those EDA districts get first pick. So I think there's certainly opportunities there. They've been able to really provide some other grants that we've taken advantage of. So I think right now, past couple of years, they've had I think a good return on investment for leveraging other grants. So,
I certainly support you proceeding.
all right.
I think it's something that Manhattan needs to be in a leadership position. And I think that we, as a region, the benefits, there is all kinds of payoff as a result of those relationships. There's no other organization where we all work together as a region like the Regional Council.
I agree. I think Mayor Jimmy Thatcher visited me from Clay Center, and he really appreciated being part of the Regional Council and the leadership, not only from Linda, but from Manhattan.
All
And
right.
I've tried to make sure that those other entities receive as many, a lot benefits. Manhattan automatically receives some of them, like with the, what was the contaminated sites and whatever you call them. But anyway, I want to be sure that those small communities, like recently Eskridge and some of the small communities are getting some of the benefits. So we have to share, and this is a place that we can do that. There are other places where Manhattan gets it all, like through the chamber, and so this is a place where we can be collaborative.
Sure.
And the original purpose of the Regional Council was to support Fort Riley. And Fort Riley has given, the Regional Council made sure that the federal government generated some money to help the Regional Council develop a sustainability plan. And they're in the middle of that project right now.
Yeah, the Office of Economic Adjustment continues to provide assistance for that because of that purpose. So that's a good point. Another item is the certified local government contract we have for historic resources. And the Historic Resource Board, the certified local government provides some distinct advantages from that standpoint, gives the local government more say on those outcomes as opposed to otherwise it would be a state review. Currently, I know we haven't always agreed, but I can tell you that the workload that we've processed has been substantial, so if you haven't had a chance to read that, one of the things we recently discovered was that in most communities that have that status, the city managers sign that contract. But I didn't want to do that. If that was something you'd rather have in front of you and have a presentation on, happy to do that. The board recently made a recommendation to renew it. It's a 5-year renewal process, and so it's up for renewal. But there's time to bring it to you if you'd prefer to do that. But they did recommend continuing that program, and certainly you might recall when there have been some disagreements between the commission and the board, there's a different set of standards. The board has certain standards they have to follow, and then you have standards that you can resolve. If
That
you
are
were
different.
not a certified local government, that wouldn't be the case. So,
it's all Topeka and the SHPO and
Right.
all that stuff, so.
so there are advantages to being a certified local government. We've also received grant funds over the years that have helped us in some of that analysis work that we've been able to do locally. So, yeah.
No, I think we should continue. I think we just have to work and make sure, we get a good cross-section of reasonable folks on that board.
Yeah, I agree with that, because if we don't do it, then it goes to the state, and that's gonna be worse. So I think we gotta continue as it is.
Okay. All right.
Sign away.
Thank you. provided some legislative updates. We provided some legislative testimony. Representative Dotson has been good about sending information to us and getting feedback from us, so we've copied you on some of the information we submitted. We did support a bill that would keep the state funding the revenue neutral rate notices. That would certainly help the county out, so that was one that we put forward, and we're monitoring several, and so certainly the league's been doing that. Dick Carter's also been providing some schedule updates, and I've had a couple of different conversations with him, so I think that communication at least has been good as we've started out this legislative season. Got some, if there's a joint city-county meeting, would be the 16th at Riley County. Keep in mind that I know there's been some suggestions for some topics, but the typical rule of thumb is if it's us providing information, that's okay, but if we want somebody else to provide information about something, we ask them if they're willing to, and that how much time do they need to prepare for that. So if you get those subject items and we can ask those questions of them, that's usually just been the standard rule of thumb.
What topics are we talking about?
Any topic.
Any topic.
Any topic. So, I mean, if it, I'd like the county commission to present on dark stores, and where they're at with appeals. I mean,
There was already something mentioned.
that would be something that we would ask them if they would be willing to report on that.
One of the topics that came up at the last meeting was about Seco Park, and Eric Reed is interested in having a discussion or presentation about the plans for Seco Park. I don't know how soon, and I am sure it involves the city because, and the county, we all have to. But I think I'm always disappointed when we can't cancel those meetings. I think there is so much that we should be talking about as a region that it's a shame for us to squander that, just give away that time and say we don't have anything to talk about. So whether it's legislation, whether it's, I don't know what the topics are, but certainly that we have professionals, we have elected officials, we should be able to come up with topics of interest to the body, or that all those groups are part of them.
It's, Potawatomi County hasn't been coming of late. It might be good to find a topic they're interested in discussing with Scorpion or whatever it might be.
Well, I think I remember, you might recall that I'm going over there every other month.
Right.
I'm not scheduled till the end of next month, but they suggested that, they'd like to get, there was a period of time when they were in that rotation of hosting,
Right.
so they feel, they kind of feel bad that everybody expects them to come over here all the time.
Well, they wanted us, they can't come on Mondays.
For intergovernmental.
They want, for intergovernmental. They wanted us to change the date, and nobody could figure out a satisfactory date to cause that to happen.
Right.
So, it may be in order to work with them better, we should, really consider a different date that they could come, because they meet right up till noon.
I'm talking
they-
about city, county.
I know,
Oh.
but I'm talking intergovernmental too. They aren't coming to those either. They're, we did have a representative from their planning office here at the intergovernmental meeting, but they're not at either meeting. So and I know Ron's going over there, but that's not enough. We need to have that interaction of professionals and electeds.
Well, if they'd come down to the Green Valley Community Center, that wouldn't be so bad.
Well,
As opposed to driving to Westy.
for example, would we ask them to host one of the meetings, and would we all go over there? I mean, it's 5 miles.
Yeah.
Think about it is all. Let's shake things up a little bit and do things differently.
If you want to pull out the planning chart, I'll go over that real quick. So next week on the 7th, we're planning a public hearing for special assessments. So this round of special assessments is predominantly all subdivision work. And so there's very little city at large components in it. There's a little bit on part of a water line and then actually most of it, and a little bit on street up on Stonehaven. But by and large, it's predominantly benefit districts, and so we start that process by holding a public hearing to notify folks of their special assessments, and then we have several other ordinances and ultimately leading to a bond sale. So we have a couple of discussion items for the general agenda. One on our boards and committee policy. That's to replace that 1997 policy that we've had historically, and then some discussion on the Consolidated Social Service Advisory Board and the Alcohol Committee. And then we also have a couple of vehicles for award. One of the things I wanted to just talk about with vehicles is this issue. I think we've shared with you some of our challenges of even finding vehicles and getting people to bid on them. And more recently, we've had a situation of we find a vehicle, but it might be available for 2 days. and so to try and get it to where if it's over my authority and schedule it, I guess I'd just be wonder if the commission would be amenable to some kind of policy that would allow me to go over my limit in certain cases to expedite availability. Certainly, I think the days of, well, there's no vehicles available on state contract. There is no state contractors. They don't have any suppliers either. And so the whole aspect of vehicle deliveries is a challenge. And so if it's something that at least you'd be interested, we'd be certainly willing to potentially provide some language to adopt some type of temporary policy that gives me a little bit more discretion to be able to lock some of those things down when we are able to find them.
I'm willing to look at that.
Okay, thank you. I see some head nods, so.
Well,
Yeah, it seems reasonable.
I think we're in unusual times. It's never happened before.
Correct.
So, on the other hand, I'm not supporting going on with it forever and ever.
Yeah.
No,
I
kind of like the
get that.
pandemic. There was a time when we had to take extraordinary measures to make things happen, but
And I think it's gonna be a while
Yeah.
before we return to
Before
some
things
of those
level out.
normalities. For sure, okay.
I don't see the bicycle and pedestrian board here. We're dissolving the arts and humanities, but I don't see dissolving the bicycle.
So we already did that. It was by resolution.
Oh, so we don't have to do 2 readings
So
on
it depends on how they were created.
I see.
So if they were created by resolution, we could
We have to
dissolve
have-
them by
No, we have to
resolution
have 2 readings is my
of an
question.
ordinance. If it's, some boards were created
Yeah.
by ordinance,
Uh-huh.
so then that takes 2 readings.
Yeah,
And
okay.
AHAB is on here for,
And because it was an ordinance then?
Right.
Okay. It's not because I want to dissolve them. I want to
Right.
understand.
No, I understand.
Why it's not here.
it really depends on how they were
No,
formed. If they were formed by ordinance, we have to pass an ordinance.
Okay.
If they were formed by
Yeah.
resolution, it only
Gotcha.
takes a resolution.
okay.
One of the other things there is, we've got an advance purchase. This is kind of tied to our supply chain issues. So the item there for professional services and our water system improvements, I'm sorry, that's a different project, but that's one where, again, we're taking our on-call program, and instead of having small projects, we're lumping them together to get enough interest for bidders to bid on. So that's that's the engineering services one. We have a pre-purchased materials item there for Kimball and Grandmere Parkway roundabout. So this is one where we have to relocate a water line. It's been a while since we've talked about this project, but we do have plans to bid that later this spring for a project that would start this summer. Part of that project does include closing Kimball around the roundabout, the area, for hopefully around like a summer for the most part. And so being able to, this water line material is one that's we've had anywhere from triple to quadruple times for delivery. And so contractors are telling us, you know, if that's something the city wants to order in advance, because if you wait till bidding, you're not gonna hit your timeframes for construction. So that's the purpose for that, but I did want to bring that up and let you know that we're planning to proceed with that particular project for bidding for construction this year. We'd like to get that done and out of the way because, as you know, we're designing the Dennison and Kimball intersection, and that'll be kind of a 2-year project. So the anticipation is that that would go to bid late this year. Would be, part of it would be a 24 construction, part of it would be a 25 construction. It's kind of in 2 phases to work around all of the activities surrounding that corridor. There's also some work we are anticipating by KDOT on the county roundabouts up on US 24. That's going to add some volume to some of our other roads because they're good. I think it's 24 for most of those roundabout works, and they're planning to do some closures between Highway 13 and Seth Childs at least for some of that, which is going to reroute, put some pressure on some of our other local roads. And I think I've even seen something about a temporary signal at Seth Child and Marlette. And we may suggest, we'll probably put those speed limit signs back up on Marlette, and maybe even, we've started some discussion with the county about some turning lanes on Marlette. There at Browning specifically and College, because it tends to back some stuff up when some of that activity's happening.
They're gonna do roundabouts on both those intersections.
They're doing, yeah, at the
Dam.
dam and at Seth Child, right.
But one goes before the other, doesn't it?
I think
They're not
they're
at
bidding
the
them
same
together.
time.
'cause
Are they
so
really
that's
bidding them
not
together?
So disruptive. Rob?
Just talk loud. Go ahead.
I hate for you to sit here all night, Rob.
All right, otherwise, we've got some, Parks and Rec has been great at getting some grants, and so we have several grants related to the linear park, as well as a Land and Water Conservation Fund grant, which is fairly significant for Schultz Park at Loma Ridge that we have matching funds for and some donations there, so.
What is it you do there?
So this is going to create, you might remember the entryway on Loma Ridge, as well as a playground, some trailhead, parking lot.
No, that's part of the master plan.
Yes, it is part of the
You'll be
master
actually
plan,
accomplishing those
So
things.
it's kind of that
Okay,
first
thank you.
phase for that entry feature and entry area.
Okay,
Uh,
grants are great for that.
Yep. And then second readings of several of the ordinances there that we've been considering. Then on the 21st, we're looking at a public hearing, so we're probably not going to be doing the public hearing on the comp plan amendment, right, Stephanie? So it'll be delayed or may not even be necessary, so we're having some additional research and discussion on that particular one, but it relates to some of the development in our urban service areas that we have been working on. The general agenda, these go together is we made the request for the island annexation of the MCM Park there west of the airport, assuming there's no protest that occurs from the county commission or their action. They've passed it, but there's 30 days for parties to protest that action. And then once if that proceeds, then these items will continue for first reading of the annexation ordinance as well as an annexation agreement with them relative to the proposed land for a business park. We also anticipate first reading of an ordinance, and it didn't make it on the list, but it's in our planning chart for, we've had consensus, I think, from the commission to create the legislation to create the replacement for Commissioner Reddy's position, so the 4th commissioner to be added to the elections this year. So this would start that process. It's my understanding, Kay, we have to do an ordinance, and then that would then have a resolution to call for because it would be a special election, or call the election to be incorporated into the regular election. So we're working on that. And then a couple resolutions there relative to fees and why it's going to be at your Valentine's Day meeting to talk a little bit about that. So assuming that goes well, this resolution would then be up for you for action. But most of that's really adjustments that we're looking at for spring, right? Spring and summer?
Yeah, there are fee adjustments that we would like to implement for summer activities and programs. And so the quick turnaround is so that we can have those fees advertised by the first part of March for registration that opens in April for activities that occur in late May and early June.
It'd be good to be early.
Yes.
Allow as much advertising time as possible.
That's
Thank you.
that's what we're hoping for.
Thank you.
There will also be discussion on the cost recovery model that we've been discussing with the park board for several months. And so that would be part of that resolution as well, changing that cost recovery approach and so we'll have all those details laid out for you.
Related to what we're talking about Parks and Rec, we did have submissions for both of the RFP and the RFQ on the Arts in the Park stuff. So we anticipate having proposed agreements back to you for this meeting as well for those services and recommendations for moving forward.
Did you have more than one?
We had one on the services component, and I think we had 3 on the AV.
That's correct.
So the production element, just one, but we think that proposal is viable. And certainly, we're in negotiation with them now and plan to bring back an agreement with you, for you. We've got some final plats, and on McCall Landing, that's basically that land between Wagyu beef and the credit union. So, not sure anything that's going on there, but they want to plat it. And then we've got a couple of awards of projects on some concrete panel replacement from Fort Riley Boulevard. That's a KDOT grant we got that we've bid out, as well as and some outfall bank stabilization near our release of the wastewater treatment plant. And I think that pretty well covers it. Work session wise, again, the next work session, Stephanie will be here to talk about some of the housing implementation discussion that they've had with the steering committee and some recommendations moving forward, and then Wyatt on the cost recovery. And then we'll get into some of those board reviews that we're taking a methodological approach to all of those, and then we get into some pavement management in May and the cemetery master plan, and then all of those open ones will be plugged with budget. So, but we haven't put the budget cycles in here on these yet. So, and I'm sure there'll be others. So we may have to have more discussion items at legislative meetings.
Here's a note on the February 21st, down at the bottom, it says that with regard to the MCM Landing Business Park, it says not in the Urban Area Planning Board purview. And so that's happening on the west side of town. And the same thing is happening on the east side. And so I'm interested in having the comp plan updated so we can have that review by the planning board and not have these things just race through and come directly to the city commission. I think that if we're going to plan effectively, we need that review.
Sure, and I think what we visited with you about at your retreat was that that's something we need to do collectively, not just for specific things.
Exactly.
But in a broader scale too.
Absolutely.
And that's something that.
And not looking at a project, but
Right.
looking at the future
big picture.
growth. Yeah,
Yep.
and, yeah. Is that on the plan?
Yeah, we don't have it scheduled yet, but we have a meeting to advance that. We had originally thought that might come later in the year, but we appreciated your feedback at the retreat, so we're gonna bring it forward sooner. It's not a full comp plan update, it's just gonna be really focus on some specific areas.
I don't think we need a full one.
Right.
I think we need.
Well, we were scheduled to do one
Were
next
we?
year.
Okay. We just need to be able to
So-
reach out.
I agree.
Beyond the boundary line that we have now.
And have those engagement with our partners and
Absolutely.
our counties, because those are going to be important growth areas, no doubt about it. Mayor, that was all I had.
That's it?
Yep.
Okay, Linda, got anything else you want to chat about?
Can't think of anything else.
John? Wynn? Yusuf? All right. In that case, is there a motion from the commission about adjourning?
I move we adjourn.
Second.
It's been moved by Commissioner Reddy and seconded by Commissioner Morse to adjourn the meeting. Acting City Clerk, please call the roll.
Commissioner Butler,
Yes.
Commissioner Motta,
Yes.
Commissioner Morse,
Yes,
Mayor Hattasol,
Yes.
Commissioner Reddy.
you're whipping right through
Motion
that,
passes.
Jared.
Very good. Meeting adjourned. Thanks for